Welcome to the Sustainable Travel Podcast. I'm Emma, your host from That Travel. This is a podcast that interviews a range of different travelers from different backgrounds to see what sustainable travel means to them. And today I am here with Mia Manning Dunmore, aka Wildlife with Mia, who is a wildlife conservationist working towards a degree in primate conservation. And today we're going to be talking about mistakes in wildlife tourism. Hi, Mia.
Hello.
How are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How are you, lovely?
I'm good. I'm so excited to have you on the show. I feel
Me
like
too.
it was one of those things where we fell into just a voice note rabbit hole of
Yeah,
like, this is
exactly.
all the stuff we need to talk about. And then we're like, we're practically podcasting
And
anyway.
then you were like, yeah. Let's pause on this until we get it on the podcast.
Yeah, I think you're going to be the perfect person to talk to about this, honestly, because if people aren't following Mia currently, super relatable person. Like, I feel like you're just so good at being like, this is who I am, this is what I do. It's
You
just
too. Thank you.
Oh, thank you. But yeah, like, for those who don't know you, tell us, like, introduce yourself, tell us who you are, how you got into conservation, how you came to be interested in this, and just what it is that you do.
Awesome. So, yeah, I'm Mia, and I'm currently doing a master's degree in primate conservation. But
Mhm.
I started on this sort of conservation path. I guess arguably ever since I was little, I've always been obsessed with wildlife. Always, always. That's what I wanted to do, or just animals. I wanted to work with animals, helping animals. And when you're younger, I think the only option you sort of, well, for me, the only option I thought of was to be a vet. So
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I'm going to be a vet. That's what I'm going to do, and work towards that. And then I did my first work experience in that. Completely fell apart when it came to actually like having to put down animals. Couldn't do it. Ran away. Was like, no, I can't. I'm too emotional for this. And then that sort of in my head made me feel like, oh, I can't help. Maybe I'm not meant to work with animals. And my other passion, still to this day, is psychology. I find it absolutely fascinating. So I then went to university and did a psychology degree, but found myself only really studying the psychology of animals. And that's all I was massively interested in. And I did my thesis on chimpanzee gestural communication and how that overlaps with human communication. Loved it. And then sort of decided that actually I could find a career path that sort of links working with people and the psychology of people and their relationships towards wildlife. So I ended up on my master's degree that I'm doing now in primate conservation, and that's what I'm super, super interested in. But as to talk about the topic we're talking about today of mistakes in wildlife tourism, before my undergraduate degree, I went on a big trip that I'd saved up for years to go traveling. It actually got halted by COVID, so I finished it post undergraduate degree. And again, with my deep passion for wildlife, I was so driven to connect with wildlife and engage with wildlife and engage in wildlife encounters. And I thought I'd done the research and I thought I was quite on it. And I was one of those people that was quite on it and was going to go to the ethical places or do things ethically. And then on starting my master's degree, I learned very quickly that I actually had engaged in some unethical wildlife encounters and it crushed me. And I was
Yeah.
so upset. And I know I just didn't know. And this is the issue for most people is they don't know when they're traveling that they're engaging in harmful behaviors and or help or like fueling them almost. And so now I have a big passion to talk about this, which I do on my social media account, Wildlife with Me, because I'm very passionate in educating people about how not to.
I
And that's
love
me.
that. That's
Yeah.
such a good little roundup of like who you are. Um, So you mentioned kind of when you were talking about psychology, which I think is really, really fascinating to look at like the psychology of animals.
Yes.
And I kind of want to dive into that a little bit further because when people go traveling and they do engage, like we're going to come on to sort of what these experiences are in a minute, but when they
Yes.
do engage in wildlife tourism, I often hear this phrase floating around of like, they looked so happy and they looked like they were having a great time.
Ooh,
This,
yeah.
whatever animal it was.
I know.
And I think it's so interesting that you know so much about this. And
Yes.
we as tourists just don't. So
No.
what do you think is different, right?
I find it really interesting when with so obviously with people thinking that the animals seem happy. Well, what I actually think in engaging in wildlife tourism, when I've thought about it a lot with my sort of psychology hat on, not that I'm an expert, but from what I thought about it is there's sort of two reasons why people engage. Well, probably a lot more, but I see sort of two reasons of engaging in wildlife tourism from when I was traveling, where it was either a oh, let me get a selfie. Oh, let me get a selfie. Let me get a photo. This is a cool animal. Let me tick it off my travel bucket list.
Yeah.
This is one of those quick things. Yeah, awesome. And they move on. Or there's the people that adore, like really adore wildlife and like, I
Like
want to
yourself.
connect with wildlife like myself, where I was like, oh my goodness, this is unbelievable. I get the chance to connect with this animal. Wow. And again, through not knowing, and no one can ever be judged or blamed for not knowing, you engage in it. But then what I think is really interesting psychologically while it's happening is, again, there's obviously some people that will engage that I've had conversations with that just didn't even think that it could be
Yeah.
unethical. They just went, enjoyed it, that was cool, went away because they didn't know anything, didn't know, so that's fine. And then there's sort of the people that go and really think, oh, I've researched this is really ethical, like this is, I'm doing the right thing. And I didn't engage in this one, but I saw an example of exactly what you were saying before about them being happy, in Koh Samui, where on a hike we ended up walking past an elephant sanctuary,
Yeah.
and I saw an elephant, in a very, it couldn't turn around, very small enclosure,
Mm.
one like leg chained to the floor, and she was so distressing, but she was shaking her head repetitively back and forth, back and forth. And before I'd done my degree and I didn't know a lot, I still thought, oh, that elephant doesn't look okay. And said that out loud, and the tourist next to me was like, no, no, read the sign, look. And there was a sign beneath this elephant with a big smiley face saying, Ellie the elephant shakes her head when she's happy.
Oh my
And now I
goodness.
know from my degree that that is a stereotyping behaviour from excessive trauma, and she was
Yeah.
completely not okay. It makes me feel sick. And again, there was a literal sign up saying she does this when she's happy. So then we didn't
They
engage, we
know.
moved on. But they knew. And all these tourists, I cannot blame any of them. And no one should, because they read a sign, they trusted the carers of these elephants, and then they were engaging in this tourism and being like, oh, because they're happy. So it either comes from just a lack of resources to education about it, or people unfortunately deliberately misleading people to
Mm.
exploit these animals, which is what's awful.
Yeah. Well, okay, so we're gonna come on to it. I did just briefly want to say it's so funny that you went to be a vet and then ended up like not following through, because when I was about 10, 5, 10, between 5 and 10, I
Yeah.
said to my grandma, I'm gonna be a vet when I'm older. And she went, are you really? Could you put an animal down? And I was
Yeah.
like, no, like don't be so horrible. And then she said, well, you can't be a vet then, can you? And that was dream over for me.
Yeah.
So,
And this what happened to me is I was like, I was literally, when I loved the first 5 days of it, absolutely found it so fascinating. And then mine was actually so sad. On the last day, they did apologize for this afterwards, but they were like, oh, Mia, could you just look after this dog for the day, this gorgeous little Jack Russell? They were like, his owner's left him here until his operation in the evening, could you just keep him company? And I was like, great, what a great day of working experience. I can just sit and bond with this dog all day. And then at the end of the day, they were like, thank you so much for making his last day so special. And I was like, it was horrendous. And they were like, do you want to sit in on the procedure? And I was like, no. And I ran home crying. And bless, like, obviously that happens in a vet context, but I was just like, I have too much. I think it's so admirable what vets do, and it's incredible. And I just, as a 15-year-old, I couldn't do it. And then that sent me off that
15.
road.
Oh, that's brutal. My heart, my heart. But that, I mean, that's just brutal. And I think
Yeah.
a very clear indicator, as you said, that like only certain people can really do that profession.
Yes.
Um,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
like what you're talking about is kind of people who absolutely love wildlife, like you said.
Yeah.
And I fall into this camp too. Let's talk a little bit. We've obviously like done major hints on what these kind of experiences are, but
Yes.
let's clarify. So when we're
Yeah.
talking about the sort of mistakes in wildlife tourism,
Yes.
we're talking about, I think, and maybe you can say what you think as
Yeah.
well,
Cool.
is tourists who go and want to engage with wildlife and are
Yeah.
very specifically, I think, looking to pay for wildlife experiences
Yes.
and might choose one that is perhaps more in the best interest of the tourists rather than the wildlife, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Definitely. Definitely.
Mm.
And I think, yeah, and when those things unfortunately happen, when it's done in an unethical context, is that these wild animals at the root of it are being exploited
Yeah.
for human entertainment and for
Mm.
fun and for touristic fun. And that's when it's a mistake, is that if a wild animal isn't in the wild and it's being used to be cuddled or petted or fed, then it isn't actually intrinsically okay, because its mental and physical needs won't be being met. And
Mm.
that's the cause of what you just said. Yeah.
And when you kind of started talking about this, you said there's two like main reasons why people get involved
Yes.
in this sort of thing. And you said that one of them was they just want the moment, the selfie
Yeah.
moment.
There's,
And
yeah.
and the second one is that they love wildlife. So can
Yes.
you talk a little bit about both of those reasons and like
Mhm.
why they might lead somebody to do an unethical wildlife experience, in your opinion?
Yes. Oh, great question. Yeah, because I think they're distinctly different and
Yeah.
also have a lot of overlap as well. But I feel like, okay, let's say you're a tourist going traveling, and I think what's really difficult as a tourist is, and again, it's why your sustainable travel conversations are so important, is traveling really, from what I've seen at its core, is quick and fast and cannot be very sustainable. And I know when you're out there and you're traveling with friends and there's opportunities left, right, and centre, and oh, where should we go today? Oh my gosh, here there's elephants, there's this. And it's this weird psychological thing of like, these animals sort of become a checklist, sort of tick off of, oh, here's a cool experience, I'll go and do that. And again, of course they are, because they're incredible. And why would you not want to see them and connect with them? Of course. But I think that can drive people that are that sort of checklist, bucket list sort of thing, that can then mean people quickly agree to go somewhere without really knowing if it's sustainable or not. And people, I think, also have just good faith that it must be done ethically. Like,
Yeah.
surely this isn't, like, people's brains won't even often go there because they just assume that it would be okay. And that can sort of be that level. And then when people deeply care, you know, again, that even if, this is where I find it really interesting, they overlap, but I'll get to that in a second. But if people deeply, deeply love wildlife and are traveling to see wildlife, then they'll hopefully research into it more and be a bit more like deliberate in their choices and more conscious of their decisions. But they could still end up in unethical situations through people greenwashing and them not, and the companies not being honest. And where I find it really interesting as like a sort of third almost reason as to why this happens is, or a process that happens, is that I can also relate to, is you can go to an activity or to specifically see the wildlife, and part way through your brain can start to go,
Yeah.
oh, is this actually okay? What am I about to do? And that's when the really interesting things happen, because it's like you almost want to kick that thought away, because what you're doing
Yeah.
is so fun, and you want to think, no, this must be okay actually, or you want to think, well, everyone else is doing it and I don't want to be the only one to not
Yeah.
have this cool experience for everyone else. I had it when I was in Bolivia, and the Pampas tour, you go through the jungle and it's amazing. And a very often done thing there, which I didn't realize until you were on the boat, is the squirrel monkeys all come to the trees that hang over the river, and they chattering and clamoring and seeming really keen and interested in you as people. And me, before I went to do my primate conservation degree, I was ecstatic that all these squirrel monkeys were here and I could see them, and they were wild. So I was like, this is amazing. We're on a boat, they're wild, it's fantastic. And then the tour guide got out bananas, and all
Oh.
these squirrel monkeys descended, well, not all of them, a few of them descended into the boat. And there was this moment in my head where I was like, oh my goodness, is this okay?
Yeah.
He's telling us all to feed them bananas and that they love it. And I was like, oh, but they are wild and they have come into the boat by choice. So
Yeah.
this is okay, right? And I've had really interesting conversations with friends that have been on these tours as well, that have said, well, no, it was they chose to come in the boat, like
Yeah.
they're wild. And that was one of those moments where the back of my head was niggling, going, there's something not right here. And but obviously I wasn't going to jump out the boat. There was like caiman crocodiles in the river. I wasn't going to hop out, but I had this niggling feeling and I did ignore it.
Yeah.
And then that brought me an immense amount of guilt when I arrived on my conservation course, because what that is, if people are listening, wondering, well, why is that bad then if they're wild, is these squirrel monkeys were really highly dependent on these tourists. They waited all day for the influx of boats to come through. We're feeding off them. It means in cases like where COVID-19 hits, they're then like
They're
dependent on
vulnerable.
humans for food. Yeah, exactly. And they can have no other form of subsistence. They also shouldn't be primarily eating bananas. It would
Mm.
discourage them from all their natural foraging skills, makes them too comfortable around humans, and also there's a risk of disease spreading because they
Mm.
could very easily bite you. So
Yeah.
but in
And to
that
add
situation.
to
Yeah,
that, it's not good for the ecosystem. This isn't
ex-
just about one animal. Like,
exactly.
if they're neglecting the forest for these bananas, then the forest suffers, in which there are hundreds of other animals, you know?
Exactly. As seed dispersals, obviously monkeys will spread seeds throughout the forest and help it regenerate. And if you are dragging them away from their usual behaviors, you're right. It disrupts the entire ecosystem.
Yeah. And I think so there's like again a lot to unpack there, so stay with me. But I think this is a really a good point, first of all, that like your options aren't okay, throw yourself in with the caimans or feed
Yeah.
the monkeys. Like
Yeah.
tourists do kind of have an agency in this situation, like they have a choice. And I think often we
Yes.
believe that we don't have that choice. But to
Such
go
right.
back to what you were originally saying about like the driving factors behind like why tourists kind of do these experiences and why they like
Yes.
want to get so close. I think this is a marketing thing. And I love what you brought up about like it's a bucket list and they want to go
Yes.
through and tick them off. Like wildlife ultimately is not something to do. It's not
No.
like on
No.
your list of 10 things to do in Bolivia or whatever. Like it should
Exactly.
be in itself. And like, I don't know, it's really hard to describe, isn't it? Because yes, of course
No.
you want to do it.
Exactly. And I really, really agree in that well, always in the past year, I've started to really think that there's this really interesting thing with with it's subconsciously in humans that it's almost your right to
Yeah,
enjoy animals as entertainment. And I think that's what underpins all of this. And we definitely have a right to admire and appreciate and be enamored and awe at how incredible our world is in these animals. But there's this really weird sense of right that, oh yeah, I can
that
hold a
I'm
slow
okay.
loris and pose with a selfie and I can and we actually don't have the right to do that. We
Yeah,
don't.
we're not entitled to
Yes.
those animals. That's a really good point. And then the other thing that you said that I also
Yeah.
am so happy that you brought it up is this cognitive dissonance that goes on when
Yes.
tourists are like, I kind of know that there's something off,
Yeah.
but like I
Yeah.
can't even now, like I mean, I consider myself to be quite educated on wildlife experiences.
Yeah.
I know there's like a like if I saw any touching, feeding, whatever, like I think I would still know. I would know, like,
Yes.
and I would say,
Yeah.
but there are certain things where still they might catch me out. Like as an
Yeah.
example, I learned really recently about the civet coffee.
Oh
Like
my goodness. Yeah.
yeah, which is a terrible thing for briefly for those who don't know. It's where they make coffee out of civet or weasel poop.
Yeah.
And it's very exploitative. Like the
Yeah.
animals in cages, but it's marketed again as this thing that's like really not that bad.
Exotic. And that they go through the forest and collect the
Yeah,
poo from the forest when they don't
they
at all.
don't.
It's impossible for them to do that.
Yeah, and there are lots of these kind of experiences that the greenwashing is so advanced that you can
Yes.
like even if you know what to look out for, you can miss it and then you can get on this experience and if you have a sort of base level knowledge, you can be like, is this okay? Like it doesn't
Yeah.
feel like it's okay.
No.
Yeah.
And then it's like, oh, and I actually know of someone the other day that posted on their story, wow, I've had this amazing toffee from Civets did it on their story, and she'd been taken on a tour of it and had it and thought it was amazing. And it's really sad to see because
Yeah.
you genuinely, as soon as you have those conversations with people, there's immediate guilt, but it's just not known widely enough what those causes are. And I think, like you said, people do get, and like I've said, you do get a nagging feeling where you could be like, is
Nagging,
this
yeah.
quite right? And then maybe it's selfishness, maybe it's I don't want to say selfishness, but maybe it's this like, oh, you just want to have that experience, so you push that thought to the back of your head,
Yeah.
you're nervous. I remember being on that boat and not actually feeling like I had the confidence to stand up and go, I don't think this is okay. I
Yeah.
actually just thought, okay, well, I'll just let these be around me and I'll enjoy this, and it must be okay. And I just pushed that to the back of my head, and yeah, now I feel very guilty
Definitely.
about it.
Well, we're going to come on to like what people can actually do, like how they can have agency. But I think it's not so much like I don't think it's necessarily like an egotistical feeling. I don't think it comes from like we're not thinking about ourselves in those moments. We're thinking about,
No.
gosh, I don't want to be the only person on this tour who makes a big deal, and I don't want to be the
Yes.
person who interrupts the guide and tells them how to do their job.
That's exactly what it was. Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
And you you put faith in the officials or the professionals while you're there. You put your
Yeah,
trust
you
in
do.
them.
You do. And also, let's not forget that when you're a tourist, you are like a fish out of water. Like people have literally taken you somewhere and been like, okay, this is
Yeah,
this country and these are the rules in this country. And
yeah,
it's kind of like tourism as an experience, it really centers the tourist. It's really about like
yeah,
you are in this bubble to learn about this place.
yeah,
And in that moment, I think it's very easy for people to be like, well, maybe this is just how it's done here, and I don't know.
yeah, yeah. No, I think that's exactly it, and that's where it's just so important. Well, I'm sure we're going to get onto it all, but it's just important to be aware of how you felt in those moments and aware of why that might not have been okay, and just trying to make conscious decisions to
Mm.
not engage in those sorts of things, informed decisions.
Yeah. So you mentioned just then the guilt, which I really want to
Oh,
talk about this
yeah,
because I know you've experienced it. I've experienced it a lot and I've spoken about it on this show. But that guilt that we
mate,
all have when we do this, I think it's so damaging.
yeah.
Yeah.
So, oh my goodness, yeah. Obviously, we've spoken about this before, but from going from joining when I joined my conservation course and I went on there like, oh my gosh, I'm about to help save primates. I'm so excited, and then I go in and pretty much in my first lecture, an experience I've had with monkeys immediately is outlined as unethical. It crushed me. I felt horrendous, and I was sat in this room with all my fantastic peers that had all come, nearly all come from conservation or biology backgrounds, and I felt like I literally couldn't speak about it. I was like, I cannot tell them. They're going to judge me. They're going to hate me, and not within my class at all. But I do think there can sometimes be. There can sometimes be in the conservationist field a tendency to judge and be like, when you see tourists engaging in unethical wildlife, it's like, why would they do that? Because
Yeah.
you forget you're in this niche bubble that has an incredible access to resources and education where you can know everything about it. So
Hmm.
you can sort of sit there on this side of the after learning about it all and be like, why would people do that? But I actually think it's so important, and I know you agree with this, for it to be a completely judgment-free space.
Yeah.
And that is the only sort of way to sort of manage the guilt, is for it to be completely judgment-free and to be able to not judge yourself and talk about it.
I think so too, because I think that when we get into this headspace of guilt, what happens is that first of all, like it's kind of like the five stages of grief or whatever. Like people get this guilt and they're like, okay, bury it, don't talk about it, don't
Yeah,
acknowledge it. And while they're busy not acknowledging it, they kind of deny that it was unethical because they're like, well, I'm sure my experience was fine
exactly.
because I have good
Exactly.
intentions.
Yes. And what's really interesting about what I find so interesting about guilt as well, I think it's Brené Brown who talks about guilt, not in a wildlife context, but she
Mm.
discusses how with guilt, if you don't speak about guilt, it can quite quickly turn into shame, because
Mm.
shame exists in sort of secrecy, and guilt asks, "Oh, is that a bad thing?" And then shame asks, "Am I a bad person?" So it's
Oh,
this thing of like, if you don't talk about it, it is internalized within you. And it's like, oh my God, I'm a bad person. I'm not going to think about it. That's something I'm going to completely avoid. I'm an awful person. Whereas, really, as soon as you speak about it and you break that secrecy sort of shame complex, then you can talk about it and the guilt will relieve. And you'll actually make such a positive difference just by talking about it and sort
mm.
of being kind to your past self and being kind to your past self that felt that guilt, because you need to harness your guilt, because it's part of your journey of learning, and to own that guilt and be like, yeah, I feel bad, it's a good thing because you care and it's
Yeah.
empathy and it'll
And,
help you.
and making it a taboo stops you helping other people who might make the same
Yes,
mistake. And
exactly.
we don't want to do that. We don't want to, like, there's people I know who are like, judgment or not necessarily judgment, but like kind of shaming people is
Yeah,
helpful. And they really believe that. And and they've said to me, it helped me because it made me realize like I had to have a stern conversation with myself. And I'm like, you know what? That's fantastic for you. And I'm so happy that you're a big person who can do that. But
yeah.
most people cannot do that. It's
No,
really hard.
no, it is. And I also think if we're talking about a way to help these situations, help them stop happening, it is to have conversation with
Yeah.
100%. The conversations is where it all starts, and it doesn't need to be. I'm such a believer that it doesn't need to be harsh or strict or
Yeah.
shaming conversations, because really, exactly like you said, people retreat into denial.
Yeah.
And because I, owned my guilt, I then had conversations with my friends about my experience in Bolivia and about everything I'd learned about animal experiences. And now it's beautiful because I get to watch my friends traveling to the
It's
same
so
places
cool.
and avoiding those touristic activities, or messaging me and asking me questions. Not that I'm the oracle of it at all, but because we've had those conversations, that happens because it was a nice understanding, just sharing of a conversation. And I think if you've been able to harness someone shaming you or judging you, like you said, that's great for you. But I personally feel that the conversation should be judgment free and open,
Yeah.
because that's how we can talk about it more.
I also think that when we put this, stay with me on this one because it's a bit of a deep thought that I just had, but I think when we put
Go
the
for it.
blame on tourists,
Yeah.
the tourists need to find somewhere to put that guilt. And sometimes
Yes.
that can manifest as kind of rage at the people who led the activity. And I think we need to be aware
Yes.
sometimes that the people
Oh my
doing the
goodness.
activities, they're just trying to survive and they maybe don't understand, maybe do understand, but maybe just like they
Yes.
need to make money, you know?
Yes. I really want to talk about this. Like for not, yeah, exactly that. And it's that, yeah, people have to make a living,
Yeah,
and there's so many unethical things that we people do in every country. And if you hadn't access to exotic wildlife and needed to make a living, and
tourists
tourists
would
are
pay.
paying for it, it's
Yeah,
going to continue. There shouldn't be this blame on them as the individual. There should be more effort put into widespread education for tourists
yeah.
to stop engaging it, so that people can find other ways to interact with tourists and entice tourists. There's so many other ways.
Yeah, widespread education for everybody is key, like the
Yeah,
tourists, the tour leaders, and maybe
yeah.
even if they already have education, more education for tourists so that tourists are like demanding for hands-off experiences.
Yeah,
There's a lot in it.
yeah.
So I think that we need to then talk about what is the next step for tourists who take part in this. And I think let's talk about like either when they're on the tours and they get that like niggling feeling, and
Mhm.
after if they happen to have done it and, ship sailed kind of thing.
Yes. Okay. I think, again, there's so many different types of unethical experiences that will be different depending on whichever experience you're in. I think if you are walking past an advertised, tourist, sometimes it can literally just be a person with an animal waiting for you to take a selfie with them. So things like that, just do not engage. If you feel guilt afterwards about it, one way to tackle that is to probably not post those photos on social media. When it comes to the selfie stuff, is to, the more things are put on social media and the more that stuff is sort of, oh, what's the word, like idolized almost, or like created as one of those bucket list tick offs, that's always going to have a negative impact. So maybe not sharing photos, unless you're sharing it in the context of an educational, this is what you should not do. But when it comes to being on those tours and getting that niggling feeling, I think if you have the opportunity to step out of that touristic experience, then and you would like to, then definitely do so. If you don't have the confidence to speak up in that moment, again, that's okay. That's, no one, that's okay if you feel like you don't have the position to be able to do that. But what you can then do afterwards is talk about it and about how it wasn't okay. And also you can leave reviews if it's a company.
Yeah.
There's TripAdvisors is the main way people, like the main thing people rely on to look at which companies to go to. So leaving reviews afterwards, as well as speaking, as well as, with traveling, you see the same people over and over and you're always bumping into the same travelers. You can also, I think, really have conversations with them. I don't know if you have any other tips too, but that's what I'd say.
No, that's great. I think, like, firstly, I would say do your best to avoid the experience if you can in
Yeah.
the first place. So, like, do good research. And
Mhm.
that's also a good point about the TripAdvisor because you can filter by like one-star reviews. And they
Yes.
often will mention like unethical wildlife, which isn't my, even if it's like five, 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 and then
Yeah.
1, 1
One.
rated. Yeah. So I think when you're on the tour or in
Yes.
the place or whatever, that is the most difficult thing to deal with. And it
Yeah.
often comes, it's like one of those things where you think of, oh, I should have said this or I should have done
Yeah,
that.
you're in the shower that night going, damn
Damn it, yeah, I
it.
should have said that. But I think one of the things that I would advise to do is ask a lot of questions because I think that's not like putting any blame on the guide.
Yeah.
It might make their cogs turn, it might not, and it might make the cogs of the other tourists turn. And while you're asking those questions, just simply step back from the activity and
Yeah.
say, everyone else can carry on. I have no judgment, whatever, like stay
Yeah.
silent. But just remove yourself. If you're not sure, just don't engage. Like I had one, I was in the Amazon with my friend and we were
Yeah.
in like Brazil and um we were just staying in a lodge basically, and there was a pink dolphin. And I was so blown away. And it came right up to the lodge, and the lodge owner or whatever it was that was there was like, "Oh, do you want to like see him?" And we were
Yeah.
like, "Obviously, yes." So
Yeah.
then he starts like feeding this dolphin and said to my friend and I like, "Oh, you can get in the water." And I had the niggling feeling, and I was like, yeah, no, I'm not going to do that. My friend got in, and I was like, okay, I'm just going to stand here. And you know what? After I researched, and my God, I was so pleased I didn't get in the water.
Yeah. Right. Because you trusted that gut feeling, right?
Yeah, and no
Yeah.
one, I didn't do the other things that I would now advise to do, which would be like ask questions, give some feedback, just be
Yes.
gentle. But I still like got rid of my own guilt.
Yeah,
You know?
because you stepped out of it. And like you said, that is completely something you can do. And even if you're stuck on a boat, you can choose to not feed the monkeys or choose not to engage in that way if you feel that. But then if you've been able to have access to educational resources or seen even a post on social media or anything like that, I think it's definitely okay to chat to just the tourists around you, even if you don't feel like you can talk to the guide and just be like, oh, how are you feeling about this? And encourage that sort of discourse as well.
Mhm. And I think people worry that they're going to be seen as like a killjoy or whatever. And
Yes.
like to that, I would say maybe, but like at the end of the day, you're probably never going to see these people again.
No, no,
At the
never.
worst, they'll think you were boring.
Yeah, I know. But again, without sounding like a killjoy, well, no, that's what's so interesting is that is exactly how it feels. But really, that in that moment, step back and go, how is advocating for these animal rights actually being a killjoy? Because most of the people in that scenario are enjoying it because they haven't thought about it or are
Yeah.
ignoring that thought or don't know about it. And
Yeah.
I do deeply believe that if most people were presented with an encounter and knew how harmful it was, they'd choose not to. So I
Yeah.
think you're always in the right position to talk about it.
I think that in a lot of times in tourism, we just don't question these activities because we are on holiday. So our mindset is like, la la la
Hmm.
la, loads of fun,
Hmm.
everything's nice. And then
Yes.
when we're presented with a difficult situation, it's like, oh, I don't want to think about that. I'm on holiday.
Yeah,
And
exactly.
sometimes we just need to. Like, there's no other way to say that.
Sometimes you just have
Yeah.
to. Yeah.
Or
You do,
sometimes
though.
we
It
have to.
tracks back to that sort of cognitive dissonance and the rights we feel we have when we're on holiday to
Yeah.
enjoy what that country has to offer. But it does just take that checking in with yourself of like, actually, I need to make conscious decisions here and informed decisions.
Definitely. And that I think applies to like every aspect of tourism that you engage in. Like you do not
Yeah.
have a God-given right to every aspect of that country. And
No.
it's not your fault that you're in that mindset because that's the way the tourism industry has been set up. But it
Yes.
is good sometimes to recenter ourselves and kind of I feel like sometimes tourists almost forget their morals when they're traveling
Yeah.
and just bring that
Yeah.
back a little, you know?
No, and I think, and I know this is sort of the whole point of this is that there needs to actually be no blame or judgment on, like you said before, any aspect of this. So people that have engaged with it,
Yeah.
people that are providing that service, the whole thing, that there should never be this judgment or blame towards specific people for it, for what they've done. It is all about actually just looking inwards kindly and saying to yourself, right, okay, I actually probably shouldn't do this, or I need to research about this or talk about this and move
Yeah.
forwards with that.
Yeah, I think that's really well summed up. So what, like, I kind of have covered this before and spoken with other wildlife experts about the general relationship that tourists should have with wildlife. But in your opinion, is there like a way that tourists can engage with wildlife ethically? And what would you say if you had to sum that up?
Hey, yes, big question.
Yeah.
I think how tourists engage with wildlife. If we put sanctuaries, visiting sanctuaries aside for a second, um, with the actual thing of if you're a tourist, as in you're moving through a country and you want to engage with wildlife, my firm opinion is that as a tourist, it should be an observational context only of wild animals that are in the wild.
Yeah.
And that's my basic summarization is that there is no, unfortunately, and I know, and it does suck because people want to be able to have close encounters with wildlife and they want to engage and love it and have that magical Disney moment.
Yeah.
Um, but there is actually no way that an animal, if it is being exploited, presented to you, that it is okay. It's physically and mentally will not be getting any of its needs met. So it's just not possible. So I would say in that context to find tourist companies that are ethically observational, so from a distance, without disrupting the animals, that you can enjoy them in the habitat they're meant to be in.
Yeah.
And then when it comes to sanctuaries, because I know that's, as a tourist you visit sanctuaries, and again that's sort of the stipulations. If you're a tourist and you're going through, it should be a hands-off sanctuary. That's how it should. That's how you'd know it would be ethical. Is if you are visiting for a day, there shouldn't really be ever any excuse for a tourist passing through to have hands-on. I obviously know if you're working there or volunteering there for a significant amount of time, there will be instances where you need to handle the animals for their care. But yeah, I think as a tourist, apart from if you're seeing them at an ethical sanctuary where they're being consciously rehabilitated and helped, it should be in the wild, hands off.
Yeah. And I think honestly, for brains like mine who
Yeah,
maybe aren't like working in this space and like also I'm quite like I need to understand things clearly.
yeah,
It's a great basic rule. Don't
yeah,
touch. Like
yeah.
don't touch.
Don't
And
touch.
at
Yeah,
the very least, that is like step one. I think there are other
yeah,
rules, like I think or rules. I think there are other like guidelines that would be
yeah.
helpful about wildlife, like for example, making sure that there's no kind of guaranteed sightings, that kind of thing.
Hmm.
But as a step one, like
Yes,
you're touching, it's probably well, it's definitely not ethical.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because and that exactly what you said. It's again from having conversations with friends where given specific examples, they would then avoid those specific examples, and then I'd
Yeah.
maybe see them engaging in a different one because it didn't follow that exact same rule, which is what I was saying before about how they're all so different. So
Yeah.
if you were to take one thing away, I guess from this call, it would about how to engage with wildlife as a tourist. It would just be hands off and
Yeah.
at a distance.
I'm so happy you said that because I see this all the time, either in like it'll be like one specific animal, like let's take elephants because they're a really like big example that people know. Like with an elephant, it'll be like, okay, no bathing. And then people are like, okay, good, but I can feed. And it's like, no, 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 it's the same process, like same process. We've been telling you guys
Hmm.
this. And then, or it'll be, right, I understand that I can't feed elephants, but I want to feed this turtle. And it's like, no, guys, like this is the
I
same.
know.
And it's like they go from one, I
I
understand why,
know.
because it's not clear. But
And yeah,
people
I used to do the exact same. I do the exact same.
and they look at it and they're like, this animal's I can't feed this animal, but maybe
Yeah,
I can feed this animal because this facility's telling me it's okay. And I
yeah,
think if that's why I think sometimes a blanket rule can just be super helpful of
yeah,
like, just don't
yeah,
touch.
yeah. And that's and I really do understand as well the sort of feeling people can have that I've had conversations about this where, oh, how is me feeding that one turtle going to affect things on the big scale? And that's sort of, and it's that and I get it. I get how you could think in the moment, oh, if I give this one monkey, a leaf or a banana, it's not going to end the whole of the world. But it's again it's the all these tiny little behaviors all add up into something much much darker. And as a tourist, yes, you're only there for an hour or
Mm.
5 minutes or a day, and think of the volume of tourists that are traveling through that. If all of them are doing that, then that is the impact. And that's why with the little steps of as an individual stepping back and having those conversations, everyone like it will reduce that effect. And I believe so strongly in that ripple effects turn into waves, and that is what talking and not involving yourself has that effect.
Yeah. And And I also think there's an added thing with this of sometimes people, yeah, people are like, well, what if I feed that one little turtle, it's not a big deal. But you also see people who find it really hard to distinguish between domesticated and wild animals. So you
Yeah.
made the example earlier of the slow loris. Like
Yeah.
people are often like, well, it's a pet, therefore it's domesticated, and therefore I can touch it. Or in the example of, say, someone on the side of the road holding out a chameleon, it's like,
Yes.
well, it looks like harmless. Harmless doesn't equal domesticated. And
No.
like, again, like, I feel like we've been saying the whole time, it's not your fault you don't have that information,
No.
but it is
No.
true.
Yes. And I think there is a moment where you have to sort of be the bigger person to yourself and say, oh, I would love to engage with that animal, but
Yeah.
I know that that's not, I now know that that's not quite right. And even though everyone else is and they all seem to be loving it, I'm going to make the right decision. And
Yeah.
if you love the animal, leave it alone.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Like
Yeah.
the slow loris thing and pet
Oh,
monkey.
it distresses me so much. Yeah.
Yeah, I could see. I knew you wanted to talk about that when I could see you when I was talking. You were like, no, no, no. But that's one that I sometimes see a lot of denial around because people are like, oh, but it was moving its arms up and it was like enjoying it, and it's like, no, unfortunately not.
Yeah, yeah. So there's a big, if anyone who doesn't know about Solarises, they're a type of primate, and they have recently, well, not actually that recently, but they've been massively exploited in the primate pet trade, and they're being taken from the wild at a horrific number and kept as pets. And they're actually a venomous primate. So to even be kept as pets, they need to have their teeth extracted to stop biting, and also just to stop them from biting and from harm, which is a horrible process in itself. But there was a viral Slow Loris video of it being tickled that then set off this whole primate thing. And like you said, made it reach its hands up in the air, which is actually a defense mechanism to secrete hormones to fight away a predator. But from a human lens, oh my goodness, this little monkey is putting his hands up in, well, it's actually prosimian. But anyway, this primate is putting its hands up in the air and it wants a hug. This is amazing. This is so cute. Let's all get one. When it was actually clearly a petrified animal, demonstrating that it didn't want to be touched. So it was, yeah, it's very
Yeah,
upsetting.
this is the thing that kind of brings it back to what you were saying when we're talking about psychology of animals. It is completely different from human psychology. Like
Yeah,
we barely even understand body language when it comes to humans.
yeah,
We're just getting there with dogs, cats, domesticated animals. Like we
yes.
cannot understand it with wildlife unless
No,
we studied it.
no, it's the same with with apes, and you see it with chimpanzees that someone you'll see a video of someone with a pet chimpanzee or etc. and people are like, oh my goodness, it's smiling, and chimps show their teeth as a fear grimace. So
Mm.
it's like when you see um, monkeys in or apes or any primate in films, for example, and they're smiling. If that is a species of primate that bears its teeth as a fear grimace, you have to think, oh, why is that animal how have they trained that animal to produce a fear grimace? Like
Mm.
and I know I know it can be a buzzkill and it can be a killjoy, but you have to make conscious decisions and thoughts of what's come behind all of that, and not place human emotion onto these animals. Like we were saying, like they're
Yeah,
not asking for a hug and they're not smiling; they're actually scared.
yeah,
And you can't blame people for not knowing that. You can't until they know.
You can't, but what I would say, and I'm sure you'd say the same, is like if you see an animal that isn't an animal that and I think we could literally apply this to almost any animal that isn't a dog, cat, or cow,
Yeah.
like the basic domesticated animals. If you see an animal that you're
Mm.
not familiar with, question everything, everything. Like just
Yes.
start
Yes.
asking questions and
Yeah.
don't stop until you know.
Yeah, because like me, when I was 18 and I went off traveling, I don't want to say victims, but as a tourist, you are part of this bucket list travel tick off um, process that does exploit wild animals. So, like you said, if you see a wild animal, question, and do your research to make sure that is this actually ethical or am I fueling a very horrendous trade without knowing?
And yeah, and like you've been saying all along, ask yourself that question without judgment so that you can give an
Yes,
honest answer.
yes,
Yeah,
yeah. Be kind to yourself. Yeah,
yeah. So I mean, we've talked about travel like a lot, which is great because in the wildlife episodes that I do, to be honest, we normally focus like more on, I guess, the wildlife, but this has really
Yes.
like been very travel focused. So what would you say is sustainable travel in general?
Oh, another good big question. Sustainable travel in general. I think, sus- again, what we've been saying, sustainable travel should be about making like conscious decisions because
Yeah.
your decisions every single day impact what you do, impact everything around you, sorry. And especially when you're traveling, I think it's sustainable travel should be about actually daily making those decisions because it is so easy to fall into when traveling this habit of go, 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 let's go here, let's go here. Oh my goodness. And having a great time. And of course, you can have a great time and make those conscious decisions. And by the conscious decisions, I mean trying to have, well, ideally, no impact at all, but you are always going to have an impact, like the least negative impact you can through traveling and interacting with wildlife. And of course, I've spoken a lot about wildlife because I'm wildlife mad, but to me, sustainable travel actually is hugely about the people local to those touristic areas. And you've done amazing work and posts on this as well. But I think sustainable travel should be about those local communities and how tourism impacts their lives daily and making informed decisions on engaging in travel that uplifts those communities and involves them rather than exploiting them and bypassing them for profit.
100%. Like, I think that everything we've spoken about in this episode is something I've been really like thinking about a lot lately.
Yeah.
And it's been so lovely to like chat this through with someone actually. But like
Yeah.
the idea that we as a tourist, like, of course it feels like it's about us because we've paid the money and we're
Mm-hmm.
like,
Mm-hmm.
yes, I'm going to go on my holiday, my vacation, my travels, whatever it is. And that's a really like that's the thing people save up for. They put all
Yeah.
their work into it, their time. They
Yeah.
really like want these experiences to
Yeah.
fulfill themselves.
Yes.
So easy to be like out of my way, like I'm coming through and traveling. And I don't think that's conscious. I just think
No.
we
You
need
could,
to
yeah.
stop that.
We do. And I know you know what it's like to go somewhere and have had a passion for a specific animal your whole life and you're like, I want to see this animal.
Yeah.
And it is so easy to go, oh my God, that tour has guaranteed sightings of that animal. We've got to go on that one.
Yeah.
And you mentioned guaranteed sightings before, and guaranteed usually if a tourist company can absolutely assure guaranteed sightings of an animal, it's not going to be completely ethical because
They
how would they
ruin
know
them.
exactly where that animal is? So it's that thing of, like we've said 100 times now, of maybe asking yourself, oh, if I really love this animal, I need to do this respectfully, even if that means less enjoyment for myself. But actually, it won't be less enjoyment for yourself because
Yeah, it'll
seeing
be
them in the
better.
wild is the best thing ever. And it's so much more incredible. And there's actually been so many studies on this that I've been reading lately, like so many, proving that tourists have such a better and more fulfilling experience seeing these animals in the wild than they
Love
do
that.
being handed them on the street. And there's so much proof of that now. So
I
it's
mean, I
just,
can attest to that. Like, I definitely
yeah,
feel that way. And the guaranteed sighting thing, like, basically, if an animal's wild, it's wild and you shouldn't know where it is. So, like, yeah,
yeah,
as you said, if they're guaranteeing it, how are they guaranteeing that? Like, let's question
yeah,
this. But I think one thing that impacts this is when tourists go anywhere, they've saved a lot of money, as we said. And often these wildlife experiences, they're not cheap. Like look at the gorillas in Rwanda or like elephant sanctuaries as well. Like if you're suddenly paying vast amounts of money, like often like a good chunk of your trip, if not like more than the
yeah,
rest of the trip, on seeing this animal, and then someone says, "Well, we can't guarantee the sightings." I'm
yeah.
sorry, like that's not great, is it?
I
And
know.
so am I going
Exactly.
to waste like $600 or like
I
whale
know.
watching, things like that?
Yeah, and that's happened to me. I went on a tour and we didn't see, into the jungle and for 2 days and we didn't see any wildlife other than, well, we saw insects and bugs,
So,
which is just as important, but we didn't see any of, the big flagship like advertised species. But it was still amazing. And but I really get it's so tough, but it doesn't have to be less enjoyable to think about the ethical treatment of an animal. It doesn't.
yeah.
It's easy to do and doesn't have to impact your experience at all.
Yeah. And that goes for kind of anything. Like it's not meant to be less fun. We're
No,
not like stripping
no.
you of your playtime. Like it's or
Yes.
I'm not doing anything, but like I think
Yeah.
those sort of guidelines are not in place to tell you like you're not allowed to have fun. You need to like think about the communities and
Yeah.
be conscious. Like
No,
that
not at
still
all.
can be what's the word I'm looking for? Like impactful, I guess.
Yeah, and it'll be fulfilling,
Fulfilling,
if
yeah.
it, yeah,
Definitely.
yeah.
Mm.
No, I completely agree. And I think, yeah, my real opinions and takeaways is just to be kind to yourself and harness that guilt. And it's it's powerful. Harness it, use it to talk to people about encounters and what you think, and that talking will have a ripple effect that will be really impactful. And yeah, that's really what I think. And it doesn't have to like affect the
Yeah.
enjoyment you have of experiences at all. It'll actually make you feel much better about it.
Yeah, definitely agree and love that. Have you got anything else to add, Mia, before I wrap us up?
No, I don't think so. This has been fantastic talk.
Yeah, it has. Just like a nice
Yeah.
gossip. I had my little water and you had your tea, so it was
Yeah. Stay hydrated.
yes. Okay, so lastly, what are you working on at the moment and where can people find you? You've got lots going on at the moment.
I do. So I have just finished the teaching component of my master's degree. And I am literally in a couple of days setting off to Zambia, where I'm going to be working with chimpanzees, hands off, studying chimpanzees, to learn more about the damaging impacts of the wildlife trade. So chimpanzees, these are all chimpanzees that have been rescued from the wildlife trade, being used as pets or in
Mm.
circuses, and they're in this fantastic rehabilitation centre to get them over their trauma. And I'm going to be studying how better we can do that, which I'm very, very excited for. And to find me, my Instagram account is Wildlife with Mia, where I share just general educational facts and fun things about wildlife. It's a page for people just that love wildlife and want to learn a little bit more. And I also talk about the ethical side of things as well.
It's such a nice page. I love like there's some videos that you do and I just get sucked in and it's like you were talking at one point about like the difference between prosimians and monkeys or like
Yes, yes.
prosimians and apes and I literally was like agog. I was like, tell me everything about prosimians. Like didn't even know prosimian was a term before that video,
Well,
but
this is it. Hence talking about slow lorises before, because people were like, "Oh, this cute monkey," and I was like, "No, it's a Persimmon." But you don't. When I joined my course, I was like, I thought I loved monkeys and apes, and now there's actually a third term that I had no idea about. So yeah, that's the page is for people that you know don't have an extensive background in conservation or biology and just would like to learn a bit more about wildlife. So I'm glad you enjoy it.
no, I do. And I think that kind of page is super needed because if
Thank you.
people are learning, like there's loads of pages about wildlife out there, very
Yeah.
few of them actually teach quite like basic stuff.
Yes, exactly. And this is what I really realized, and thank you for saying that, was I really realized what's about this sort of niche bubble of conservation where I was having all these fantastic talks with, from what I was learning with all my peers and my courses down at Oxford Brookes. And then I would travel back home to Derbyshire and start having these same conversations. And, rightly so, my friends that have not had an education in conservation were like, wait, what? Wait, what?
Yeah.
Slow down. And I was like, actually, this information needs to be so much more accessible because I think most people care. They just need to be reminded that they care when there's many other things going on in the world, and also have a platform where it's actually accessible for them to enjoy it and learn. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Definitely. And I think that the knowledge gap, like you said, between
Yes.
wildlife experts and people like me and average Joes is just so wide.
It's
And
huge, yes.
and that's even in places like the UK where the research is being conducted here. Like
Yeah,
I know that in Oxford it's like a really big centre for primate research. So a
yeah,
lot of the research gets done there. But primates don't really live in the UK. So you've
no,
got like primates in like,
yeah,
Costa Rica and Latin America and South
yeah,
America and then Africa. And this knowledge has to get from England or like wherever it's being done to there. Then it has to translate to the wildlife experts who then have to convey that to the tourists and like normal people. And it's like it's
exactly,
got a long way to go and it's all being gated.
exactly. I know, and I'm really hoping the education system. I mean, in England, they've just brought in a natural history GCSE, which is fantastic. But in England, and I think over most of the world, there needs to be so much more of wildlife education in the school systems. And until that continues, I'm trying to contribute to that on my
Love it.
page.
I love what you're doing. Well,
Thank you.
Mia, thank you so much. You've been an absolute joy, as I knew you would be. This has been the Sustainable Travel Podcast. You can find us on Instagram at the Sustainable Travel Podcast, or we're also on my website, which is thattravel.co.uk. And if you're listening on Spotify or YouTube, please don't forget to like and subscribe. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Bye bye.